to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Good morning, everyone. I am MD, and this is the fourth branch program. Today we have a special debate about race relation in America. And we say it is special because we consider the discussion today as a turning point in our discussion in race relation in America. For the past few weeks, we have been pretty much focused on the era of slavery, on the period of slavery in the country. Now we are on the bridge of the Civil War. Of course, for the past 2 or 3 days, we have been talking about the Civil War as well. But especially today, we're walking the last mile on the Civil War bridge, in which we will discover casualties, plenty of casualties, death, and beyond slavery, beyond walking the last mile on that Civil War bridge, we will find out also that we are not just talking about human casualties. We're not just talking about death. We are not just talking about a period in time in which everything that happened stayed there, but rather we will show you that we crossed that bridge, leaving behind pile of bodies, but also carrying with us what is impossible to destroy, or at least so it seems. So stay with me. We will kind of give you a recap as to what we have been talking about, and crossing with you the last mile on the bridge. And from that point forward, we will be looking at the vestiges of slavery, how blacks are still coping with this predicament in the midst of the 21st century. I'll be right back.
Hi, I am MD, host of the fourth branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the fourth branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man." the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason. Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
If you join us for the first time, welcome. War on Blacks is a topic in which we discuss exclusively race relations in America, more specifically the interaction, the dynamic between blacks and white. Of course, if you join us for the first time, let me set the stage for you. One, we acknowledge that there are millions of whites who are racist and discriminate, and also millions of other whites who are not racist and who do not discriminate. We also acknowledge that everyone living today, black and white, was not around during slavery. We also understand that not everyone is at the same level of acknowledgement of racism and discrimination in America. As such, we decide that the best way to advance this conversation is to take a look at the three main factors which are important in order to solve any problem. One, to acknowledge or identify the problem. Two, to understand the problem. And three, to bring a remedy, a solution to the problem. We already also established here for the past few weeks that the first point, the acknowledging or the identifying of the problem, we already have a big issue with that, because there are varying degrees of understanding, of acknowledging of the problem. Blacks in general would tell you that the problem is serious, is widespread. Whites, depending on their circumstances, depending on their status, depending on where they live, and so on and so forth, would tell you that, well, some would acknowledge that the problem is there, but it's not as widespread as blacks say. Others would simply shrug it off, and yet others would not care. Now, the main difficulty of solving race relation in America lies on the fact that, well, as I mentioned, there are two major groups: whites who are racist and discriminate, and whites who are not racist and do not discriminate. Now, the major aspect of the problem is understandable. Blacks do not want to talk about it because they're highly emotional about the whole thing. Whites do not want to talk about it because they are very defensive about the whole thing. As such, both sides needed to solve the problem stand as far apart as one can imagine. And for some reason, both sides or everyone think that someone can wave a magical wand and all of a sudden the problem will disappear. I am here to tell you that's not going to happen. That's the reason we've taken this step at the fourth branch, not only to identify, to acknowledge, and to bring that type of information and knowledge to the forefront, but also to explore the roots of the problem. Only at that point will we be in a position to say, here is what we can have as a remedy or to eradicate the problem altogether. Now, I am going to give you a few examples that would help illustrate an important aspect of this conversation. Now, remember, we're talking about the end of slavery because we are at the point where the Civil War is about to end. Those who wish to keep slavery around will lose, loss, and of course, everyone would, especially those on the winning side, would cheer, clap, hug. But what was not understood at that time is the fact that the war against the treatment of blacks, the war against slavery, was won, but the fight continues. And as such, blacks, casualties on the black side continue to mount. Physical casualties, emotional casualties, psychological casualties, and financial casualties. We will explore all those various forms of casualties that blacks have been subjected to since they set foot in America, willingly or forcibly. Now, here's an example that, well, actually a few examples that I will bring forth in order to establish this link, in order to show this aspect of the conversation about the bridge that we're about to cross, and show that maybe that bridge should have just been blown up instead of people just crossing that bridge. It seems that no one at that time had the foresight to see that crossing that bridge was not enough. It was something more needed to be done. Now, what am I talking about? In Massachusetts in 1995, there was a tragedy that happened. A woman by the name of Carol Stewart, pregnant woman, out with her husband, Charles Stewart, and went to a restaurant. They had great time, according to eyewitnesses, and they left. But they never got home. Now, you're gonna see an aspect of the conversation that necessary to keep in mind, because as we continue the conversation about race relations, every event, every incident, every aspect of that happens in the country, whenever there is some kind of relationship between blacks and white, we will be able to trace that at the other side of the bridge. Now, I will show you, which I did a rough sketch. It's not perfect, but it will get the point across. Now, that bridge that exists, it's not anything to do with the period of slavery. Just wanted to make a point on the On the left hand side, you see that there is an arrow that points towards slavery. On the other side, another arrow that points towards freedom. And of course, that bridge is the Civil War bridge. Now, this is that is the bridge that both whites and blacks cross. Now, as that bridge was being crossed, and that's the part I will try to bring forth and explain exactly what I meant by the war ended. Those who were against slavery cried victory, claimed victory, cheer and hug one another, but they forgot that the most important part of the war must have been won, but nothing really changed the state, the dynamic, the interaction between blacks and white. Now back to our example. Charles Stewart and Carol Stewart left the restaurant all happy according to eyewitnesses. They were laughing, joking, and they were having fun. The woman was pregnant, and it looks like, I'm just adding that part at the restaurant. Maybe there were some jokes made about that because Charles Stewart happened to have been a middle-class individual who was in real estate, and by all accounts, people in that social status, social ladder in Massachusetts must have known Charles Stewart. So they left the restaurant, and they never made it home. An hour or so, a 911 phone call was placed. Charles Stewart was on the phone screaming, "I am shot, I am shot, my wife was shot, I need help, I need help." The wife was shot in the back of the head. Charles Stewart was shot somewhere in his somewhere below his heart, in his belly, and he was bleeding. Well, needless to tell you, white man, white woman, phone call, I was shot, police swarmed the area, got there, canvassed the area, looking for the perpetrator, looking for weapon, could not find the weapon, could not find the perpetrator. Charles Stewart was transported to the hospital and was provided care. The wife died, was pronounced dead on the scene. As Charles Stewart was able to provide in and out of consciousness some information to law enforcement, he identified a black man. Unfortunately, we don't have that information here for you. We do have the information, but we don't have it ready for this program. It's something that we will talk about because there are a number of those incidents that we will bring forth once we cross that bridge, and we will continue that conversation to show that yes, the war, slavery ended, but the fight against blacks continue to cause casualties on the black side. And they managed somehow, Mr. Stewart managed to provide some sort of information to cops, and they did some sketch pretty quickly, and they identify who might be that perpetrator. And what I'm about to tell you is not reading about it, because I was in Massachusetts then, and I remember at that time, if you were to tune in and saw what I saw with my eyes, you would think you were in a third world country run by a dictator, and the way they were ransacking blacks' neighborhood looking for the perpetrator. And by that, there is no exaggeration about it. It was unbelievable that squad of police knocking door, kicking door, looking for that individual in the neighborhood they believe that that individual live. The residences where presumably that individual live. Camera were following and they didn't care as to what was being shown on TV. It was unbelievable the way that blacks were treated to find the perpetrator of a crime. By violating civil rights, that wasn't just by violating civil rights and constitutional rights of one individual that they thought did that crime. They violated civil rights and constitutional rights of every black in that neighborhood. It was a scene that even if you were to see it in a movie, it would have been disturbing, let alone it happen. They never found the individual, but they knew who the individual was. They identified the individual as Willie Bennett. We will show you that information. We will most likely revisit that information. But I mention all that for one reason and one reason alone. How quick the white community, society was to find the criminal, the savage, the perpetrator of such a heinous crime. How could someone be so violent, killing a woman by shooting that woman in the back of her head and just shot the man in the stomach? And of course the man survived. The gist of the story, we will revisit all the detail of the story, but I'd like to move forward with the story. It was never a black man. It was Charles Stewart himself who killed his pregnant wife. Now, all this nice time at the restaurant was a cover-up to give the impression there was nothing wrong between them. In fact, according to family members, there was nothing wrong between them. Charles Stewart had financial problem. He wanted quick money because he had a huge life insurance on the wife's head. But he pointed to a black man, and all black men were identified as the perpetrator of a crime. 1995. 1989, in New York City, a white woman was raped, brutally murdered. 5 teenagers, black teenagers, were quickly identified as the perpetrator. Police rounded them up, and the whole society of the whole state of New York was asking for the death. Donald Trump took $100,000 ad on the paper, which I will show you also in future episode, that asked for the death penalty to come back in order to kill those 5 teenagers. The gist of the story? Not a single one of them was involved in that murder and that rape. 1949, in Florida, Groveland, Florida, 4 black teenagers were brutally murdered after being accused of raping a white woman. Now, I have to add that January 15, 2019, that this year, Governor DeSantis just issued a posthumous pardon for those teenagers after finding all the information that it was just a concocted story. But they lost their lives because they were accused of raping a white woman, and white society was outraged because, well, blacks, how could they do something so savage, so criminal? It so happened not a single one of them was involved, but unfortunately they died in the hands of white mobs. Now, for the 5 teenagers in New York, they survived, but they spent 20 years in jail for a crime they didn't commit. 1990, a woman by the name of Susan Smith drowned her 2 kids. Her story: a black man hijacked the car with the kids. Now, you see where I'm going with that? Now, those are stories that I single out to talk about, to give a sense of what had happened on that bridge. But those stories will revisit and actually talk about in detail. But I want to bring the story further down in order to understand where that problem came from. 1749, slavery time. That was also in New York City. Now, contrary to all the story that I just mentioned to you, that one was quite unbelievable. A group of police officers decided, they had that gut feeling. Now follow that clearly, because it's the stories that all those examples I just gave you, those are not isolated examples. There are plenty more that we will bring as we continue the conversation. Not the point of those stories is not to simply place the blame on those who have done that, but rather to identify a problem that has been lingering, that has been plaguing, that has been a plague in the country, and yet society continue to shrug off the problem, ignore it, skirt around it, and hoping that someday maybe there will be a miracle, everything will just disappear, as if we're living in a nightmare and we will wake up and everything will disappear. As I mentioned earlier, that's not going to happen. The solution to the problem is what we're proposing. Identify, first acknowledge the problem, understand the roots of the problem, and solve the problem. There is no one that can be waved and fix that problem. Especially here in America, where the problem is ingrained, internalized, especially in the white circle of our society. And that's something we at the Fourth Branch want to bring forth in the conversation over and over and over, with example, until it's understood what the problem is and everybody gets on board to solve that lingering problem. It is not a problem that we can continue to live with. It is a problem that must be resolved for the sake of future generations, for the sake of advancement in the United States of America. 1749, in New York City, a group of police officers, actually 1741, a group of police officers had this brilliant gut feeling that a group of blacks are about to cause havoc. They're gonna do uprising. They're gonna cause problem. Notice I said gut feeling. Translation: there was no incident, there was no proof, there was nothing that happened except gut feeling. What happened next? They rounded up all black men, ages 16 and up. They arrested them all. Now, remember, slavery time. Blacks had no right. Blacks couldn't do anything In fact, whatever a white man said, that's what was the Bible truth. There was absolutely no word a black man, a black individual could say that would exonerate them. In fact, if a black individual were to say something contrary to what the white men say, they would say, what are you saying? You saying that white men lied? And that also was a crime. And if the black man stay silent, it was an insult. So there was absolutely no behavior that a black man could adopt that could save him. Story forward, they were all rounded up, arrested, and, well, they had their day in court to tell their stories. By the way, that was just a semblance of day in court because, again, as I mentioned, blacks did not have any right. That was proven even in the 1950s with the Dred Scott. Actually, it was later than that with the Dred Scott versus Fairstein trial. That even the Supreme Court say, well, you have no right. You're a black man. So those black men rounded up, brought in front of a judge, and of course all the whites came and tell the stories about what they think is going to happen. They are witnesses of they see blacks who doing this and that, so they think it's in preparation for uprising. Guess what happened next? They found them all guilty. By the way, not a single one of them has done anything. By anything, I mean absolutely nothing except for a group of cops that had the gut feeling that an uprising is about to happen. So when you hear Charles Stewart saying a black man killed his wife and shot him, when you hear Susan Smith, a black man hijacked the car with the kid, or you see in New York City that 5 black teenagers were quickly rounded up because they brutally raped a white woman, or in Florida, that's not isolated cases. Those things have been happening, and when that bridge, that Civil War bridge was being crossed, we didn't leave behind slavery. We didn't leave behind hatred for black slaves. We didn't leave anything behind. The only thing that happened on that bridge is a pile of bodies, a pile of wounded individuals. But the bridge, white crossed that bridge along with blacks, with all the baggage that they had, with all the hatred, all the resentment that they have against black. They crossed that bridge with it. Nothing was left behind. They carry with them everything that they had against blacks, as if blacks caused the problem. They could not come to their senses to realize they were one who had been victimizing blacks. They the one who were causing harm to blacks. They the one who were subjected black to inhuman treatment. They did not, they could not, even up to today, as you can see, nothing has changed. A police officer execute a black man or non-black man, unload his weapon on a non-black man. The first defense, I was afraid for my life. Yes, all the white individuals crossed that bridge with all the resentment, all the hatred that they have had for black people. They crossed that bridge with it, with even more so because they had other things in mind that weren't resolved. Now, to finish the story about those police officers who had the gut feeling, and the judges and the eyewitnesses, guess what? All of it, not some, not part, all of it was made up. Yes, history reports that. All of it was made up. The police officers were involved, the witnesses were involved, the judges were involved in the whole thing. All made up. It was natural then because blacks didn't have any right. Blacks couldn't do anything. So it really didn't matter. There was no need to do a semblance of trial because blacks were executed for trying to escape slavery. They escaped, they found them, they executed them, they hung them. So there was no reason to go through this rigmarole. They could have just executed them. Yes, all made up. 1741 in New York City. And as we see, you may remember another important individual in the history of interaction between blacks and white, Emmett Till. Young black man was literally, savagely killed by white mob because a white woman said that he touched her butt. 1955. Now the woman in question, by the way, just recently, a year or so, published a book to actually make the statement, in the gist of the book was to say that never happened. Emmett Till never touched her butt. Would not even dare doing that. But that's all she had to say. That was beyond slavery. Almost 100 years after the emancipation of slaves. 1955, just 10 years short of a century. Now, when we return, we will take a look at the casualties on that bridge and why blacks today continue to suffer casualties of the Civil War.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discrimination, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
(1865). Abraham Lincoln signed an executive order that says from that point forward all blacks are free. Now, if you don't care about history, you simply want to highlight, you would say that there was slavery and Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president, put an end to that. And to the extent of understanding of that period in our history, that's the type of information most individual, blacks and white, seems to cling to. And because of that, it seems, well, it was a bad period. It shouldn't have happened. Blacks shouldn't have been slaves. And, well, it's over. Let's get over it. Let's just move forward. Well, we could have, as I mentioned many times, except for one problem, for blacks in particular. We cannot escape that bridge. We're stuck in that bridge. To no fault of ours. The Civil War happened because obviously Abraham Lincoln was, like many other millions of whites in that period, were disgusted by the practice of slavery. That's good to know that since the beginning of time there were always whites who are not racist and who do not discriminate, who have a sense of decency, common sense, and who would do anything to change that kind of predicament. But unfortunately, on the other side, there were also millions of whites who saw nothing wrong with that. To them, slavery was, well, fantastic because it enriched them. White slave owners found in blacks a source of wealth, free labor, property that you can do whatever you want to. You can dispose of however you want to. I pointed out to you a particular individual, not because he was unique, but just to give you a sense as to how blacks were being purchased and sold. Nat Turner, he was purchased when he was just a baby, sold when he became of 10, 12 years old to another slave owner. And then later on, he was sold again. So it became a practice for white slave owners, that fantastic opportunity to get richer and richer and richer. They never saw any reason for slavery to end. They were making money. They became richer, buying land, buying properties, buying houses, increased their businesses, sending their kids to school. Why would you let that end? As such, when Abraham Lincoln became president, those whites, those racists, those bigots, they prepared for war. But the way that they started that is by dividing the country. All the country in red, I placed their names, on the states that decided to join those who wanted to keep slavery around. All the states in red wanted to keep slavery around. All the states in pink also had slaves but wanted to end slavery. So they sided with the Union, which is represented by the state in blue. Now Kansas is in green because they call it the bleeding state, and the reason for that is because half of Kansas was with the Union, half of Kansas was with the Confederate state. Of course, the rest of the country was, well, the territories of the United States. So they were involved in that fight. Now that bridge that I just showed you earlier it looks as if the ghosts of those who were killed crossing that bridge still there, still haunting us, especially blacks, still haunting society. Now Abraham Lincoln, just like John Brown, an individual I talked a lot about because he was kind of a pioneer in the fight against slavery. Not only did he put his life on the line, but he also enlisted 5 of his sons to help in the fight against slavery. Actually, John Brown and 4 of his sons were killed doing just that. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He wasn't doing it because he aspired to become a great politician or anything like that. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. Now, on that bridge, here's what happened during the Civil War. I already pointed out main characters of the Civil War, where had Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederate state. By Confederate state, those are the states that I just mentioned, the states in red. Those are the Confederate states. Those are the states where slavery was not just allowed, not just existed, but also they wanted to keep it that way. That's the Confederate state. Jefferson Davis was the individual who was the president of the Confederate state. So they were trying to split the country in two. A side where slavery was allowed, and of course the Confederate state, and the Union state were the Union states were the state where slavery wasn't allowed, was abolished. So the Union was fighting against the Confederate state to put an end to the whole thing. The part that troubles me is the fact that I mentioned it before, but it continued to trouble me that you have millions of individuals who put their lives on the line to help perpetuate a system which is disgusting, wrong, inhuman. You have to ask yourself the question, did any one of those individuals have a brain? Now, I know whenever I talk about Republicans and I say they're ignorant, they're naive and gullible, I have a tons of tweets that some of them are, of course, insulting as well, but others are very threat as if what I'm saying is not true, when we have facts, we have not just saying that, but we have information that we can rely on to say that can only be done by ignorant people. Now, I know calling anyone an ignorant individual is an insult, but interestingly enough, all men are born ignorant. But many have chosen to stay and live in ignorance. That's the problem. Calling an individual ignorant, I guess we could say all of us were at some point ignorant. And whatever topic, whatever subject, we can be ignorant in that subject. Now, when you choose to stay ignorant, that's a completely different story. Now, in the case of those individuals during the Civil War who chose ignorance as the path forward, the question must be asked. Now, by ignorant, we don't mean people who didn't go to school. We don't mean people who don't have a college degree, because most of the individuals who have displayed ignorance in their behavior, in their action, in their language, usually those people have a college degree. Some of them even flaunt the idea they have a PhD. And that's the scariest spot in every discussion. People who went to college, now if the individual didn't go to school, didn't go to college, you say, well, that individual cannot know any better. But when you have people who went to college, who got a college education, and you see the kind of behavior of that individual, which tells you that that individual is completely ignorant, now that is scary for the country. Because you expect that the way of progress is for someone who have a certain level of education to be able to use that to his or her advantage and to act a little bit more like an educated individual. The Civil War happened, the number of casualties recorded were high, very high indeed. Anywhere between 750,000 to 1 million dead. On that bridge, that's what we have. 1 million dead individuals on that bridge. And the reason? Because there were white slave owners who did not have anyone smart enough in their midst to realize that they were doing something wrong by enslaving human beings. So they fought to keep slavery around. Yes, those were individuals, and that's what even mind-boggling about the whole story. Were individuals who went to church to listen to the gospel, to preach or hear about the love of God. Those were individuals who regularly frequented church, talked to pastor, they know pastor, they were small communities. And yet, not a single one of them, not the pastors, not the priests, not anyone had the mindset or the brain or the intelligence to even stop for 1 second and say, hey, that is not right. Doesn't the love of God teach us to love everybody? Of course not. Not the pastors, not the priests, not the judges, not a single one of those individuals. And yet, they feel insulted when you call them ignorant. That was pure ignorance. Ignorance that the country is still paying for. It is expensive to be ignorant. Ignorance is not a badge to wear. You cannot proudly go around and flash your ignorance badge because, well, it says a lot about you. So being ignorant is not a compliment, but it's something that can be changed. Yes, all of us were born ignorant. All of us. When you hear the expression, so-and-so was born a genius, that's just an expression. No one was born a genius. Everyone was born ignorant. We have to be taught. You have people who have ability, quick ability to absorb material things, difficult things, better than others. That's why they call them geniuses. But everyone was born ignorant. What each one of us does determine the path we take in our lives. But no one was born smart, was born a genius. But what boggles the mind is the fact that Jefferson Davis was a senator, legislator. He wasn't no stupid individual, had college education, and yet he propped himself as the president of the Confederate State. Yes, the state that wanted to split from the United States in order to keep slavery around. As such, the war was fought hard on one side, and that's the way it still is in the United States. On one side, there were whites only. Now let me rephrase that. On one side, there were whites only fighting to keep slavery, but they forced some black slaves to fight with them. Go figure that. Because they didn't have enough manpower, so they needed help. So who did they turn to? Isn't that some irony how ignorant those people were? You see the irony in this whole affair? You fighting to keep slavery, meaning blacks, to keep black slaves, and then who did you turn to help you do that? Black slaves. Now, I tell you that story not because I want to talk about slavery, but I want to make certain as we move forward in the conversation in race relations, you understand where the problem comes from. Because we didn't just wake up in the midst of the 20th century and now in the 21st century and find that racism and discrimination just sprang out of nowhere. That's not the way it happened. It happened because the terrain for that to happen was being set. Whites, without having to go all the way about the beginning of slavery, whites purchased blacks as slaves. They worked them to death. Yes, the same white today that you hear running for president that calling blacks lazy. Yes, those same type of individual. They forced blacks to work 18 hours a day, non-stop. And today you have people who come from that lineage of slave owners. They have the gall to call blacks lazy. That's unbelievable. Now, 1 million individuals on people from both sides, those who wanted to keep slavery around and those who fought to end slavery, many dead. According to historical record, on the Confederate side, they had approximately 365,000 dead. On the Union side, they had 290,000 dead. Now those were people fighting. Now civilian death also increased those numbers on both sides. That's why at the top of this conversation we say there were approximately 3/4 to 1 million dead. Wounded on the Union side, there were approximately 282,000. On the Confederate side, there were approximately 137,000 wounded and 437,000 captured. People who died in prison are not even added to that numbers. People were killed in action. People were unaccounted for. And that's both on the civilian side and on those who were in the midst of the fight. So on that bridge, there were many casualties. One side fighting to cross to freedom, and the other side fighting to keep slavery around. It's a war that needed not happen. Had one individual, just one, had the mindset, the intelligence to understand that slavery was not right. Jefferson Davis, the individual who became president of the Confederate States, had 78 slaves. Abraham Lincoln said, as I would not be. Abraham Lincoln is the individual who put an end to slavery. That individual you're looking at. Abraham Lincoln said that as I would not be a slave, I would not be a master. That's my definition of democracy. Yes, that's the way Abraham Lincoln saw the system of democracy. He did not have slaves. His parents did not have slaves. He saw firsthand the treatment that blacks were subjected to. John Brown, which we discussed at length, kind of remind me of Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln wasn't there himself fighting the fight. He was the president. He was coordinating the whole Civil War. John Brown was in the fight. He put his life and the lives of 4 of his own children on the line to end slavery. Now, the white slave owners, as I mentioned, they wanted slavery around because slavery enriched them. Slavery gave them the ability to become richer and richer, buy properties, buy land, buy businesses, send their kids to Ivy League school. As such, they saw blacks as a way for them to stay on top, to continue to be rich, to be wealthy. To them, that's all it was. Blacks shouldn't have any other role in mankind, in the history of mankind. Now, that bridge is heavy. And our idea here is to completely destroy that bridge, because the passage between the past and the present is too easy. And that's the reason today racism, discrimination are rampant in the United States of America. And we need to blow up that bridge. And that's the purpose of this program. Not just to remove the bodies, but to remove the bridge altogether. If we ought to forget the past, if we ought to forget the Civil War, if we ought to forget slavery, we cannot continue to live with the same predicament, under the same system that blacks were subjected to, and call for an end to this whole conversation. I mentioned before, and I'll mention it again. If you are related or you're a descendant somehow of white slave owners, you cannot wash your hands off the problem, because that bridge that I just showed you, while both blacks and white fought on that bridge for different reasons, of course, forget about the casualties for a moment, the physical casualties. because obviously the physical casualties are still on the bridge. They stay on that bridge. But what, unfortunately, those wounded, those who were not part of, were not actively involved in that fight, but wish for the Confederate States to win, when they cross that bridge, they cross it with a lot of baggage. I'm referring to white slave owners' descendants. They didn't just cross the bridge and forget about it. Yeah, slavery is over. I'm glad slavery is over. That's not the way it happened. You may know, or you may not know the story behind it, but in the South, white sleep with weapon, rifle at that time, next to their bed, in their bedroom. And there is a reason behind it. You see, before the Civil War erupted, blacks, contrary to popular belief, blacks were already fighting against slavery in every way that they could. And they couldn't wait for the Civil War to fight because they were being killed en masse by whites. Every time that they tried to escape, they could not, because they had no means of escaping. Even when they escaped from a master, they live in the South. There were nowhere they could have gone to escape slavery, because no matter where they would have been spotted, the whites would have known that those were blacks, slaves. They would have either captured them to work on their own plantation, or if they knew who they belonged to, who were the slave masters, they would have returned them to the slave masters. Now that is if they were nice. If not, they could have just killed them. They had nothing to account for. Now, because of that, there was a war boiling underground in the hearts of both blacks and whites. Blacks were, of course, especially the younger generation, they were itching and working aggressively and planning and strategizing not only to escape slavery, but to make certain that white slave owner paid a price for killing their parents, for killing their sibling, for no reason other than trying to escape slavery. I gave you those examples before. We'll touch on them later, not talking about slavery again, but just to show you where that particular sentiment, interaction, dynamic between blacks and white, why those type of resentment survive beyond the Civil War. So because of that problem, blacks were using a different strategy. Instead of just escaping, now they kill while escaping. See, white, when that strategy was implemented, all of a sudden, blacks are criminal. They started with just wanting to escape slavery. Didn't want to hurt anyone. They just didn't want to be in the predicament they were. They just were escaping. But every time white slave owners chased them, captured them, their end was execution, public execution. So the slaves became, at least the younger generation, became smarter, and they started to think, why are we just being killed, massacred for just trying to escape that kind of predicament? So they changed their strategy. Kill while escaping. And that's why whites, all of a sudden, paranoid in the South, they feel blacks are criminal, they're killing whites. That happened before the Civil War. That was beginning to be the strategy among the slaves. Let's do damage, so when we get caught, if we get killed, well, we know that was coming anyway. But because of that strategy that they implemented, whites now start spreading the message out. Blacks are criminals, blacks are savage, they're killing whites. Wait a minute. Is it what white was doing for 4 centuries to blacks? But all of a sudden, blacks were the problem? And mind you, in this context, blacks had every right to want to escape slavery and killed in the process. But whites flip the script and start calling blacks criminals and start calling black violent. They start putting label on blacks, label that actually belong to them. But those labels stick with blacks, and we'll find out why. And you, if you are a descendant of white slave owners, you will find out why your ancestors passed down that information to you, and you internalize it, and your sentiment towards blacks are not justified, because blacks are not the problem.
Hi, I am MD, host of the 4th Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the 4th Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
Tyson Fury said, racism is a sign of ignorance. Maybe, but what if the ignorant are ignorant of their ignorance? Is there hope to solve that problem? I hope you find this program interesting. Hopefully you will also join me next time, which is Monday at 2 p.m. when we continue the conversation beyond the Civil War, in which we will start debating topics which not only show why racism, discrimination is still rampant in the United States, and of course that bridge that we cross, and show you the casualties on that bridge will be used as our focus in future conversation, and the goal will be to destroy that bridge. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. See you next time.
The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the Branch application, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchenne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.
Join me here